There exists a knowledge so dangerous that entire civilizations have encoded it in symbols, hidden it in temple walls, whispered it only to initiates who proved themselves worthy through years of preparation. And what is this knowledge? That sexual force is not merely biological, not simply a mechanical impulse, but the most concentrated form of cosmic creative energy available to human beings. The ancients knew what modern science is only now rediscovering, that sexual energy, when consciously directed, becomes the furnace in which ordinary consciousness transforms into awakened perception. This is not metaphor. This is operational reality. And those who learn to work with this force discover capacities that seem supernatural to the uninitiated eye. Neuroscientific validation arrived quietly in journals most people will never read. Researchers at institutions like the Max Planck Institute have documented what happens in the brain during conscious sexual activity. When sex is mechanical and compulsive, the brain releases dopamine in spike and crash patterns nearly identical to substance addiction. But when sexual energy is engaged with intentional awareness, something radically different occurs. The entire limbic system synchronizes. Theta wave activity, normally only seen in deep meditation, begins to dominate. Research from the University of Montreal revealed that during conscious sexual states, the brain produces DMT-like compounds endogenously. The human body becomes its own psychedelic pharmacy, opening portals to non-ordinary consciousness without any external substance. But this knowledge is ancient, far older than our laboratories. The tantric practitioners of medieval India built entire spiritual systems around this principle. The Taoist masters called it dual cultivation and warned that casual loss of Jing was the fastest path to spiritual stagnation. Christian Gnostics taught that the virgin birth meant the capacity to birth new consciousness without dissipating sexual force. The Kabbalists encoded it in Yesod, the sexual center that must be purified before ascent to higher spheres becomes possible. Every genuine tradition contains this teaching. Sexual energy is divine energy in its most accessible form. Now here's where it becomes dangerous, where you need to pay attention. You begin to notice a deadness in the eyes, a fatigue that sleep doesn't fix. There's compulsiveness masquerading as healthy desire. You feel drained after sex rather than energized. Your dreams become chaotic or disappear. Your creative projects lose momentum. These aren't moral failings. These are energetic facts, symptoms of a system hemorrhaging its most precious fuel through unconscious channels. The progression unfolds in stages. In the first stage, sex is merely physical, pursued without conscious attention to the energetic dimension. The person feels normal, functional, unaware anything is missing. In the second stage, a pattern establishes itself. Frequency increases, sexual release becomes a way to manage anxiety, boredom, loneliness. In the third stage, the person notices less vitality, less creativity, less sustained focus. In the fourth stage, energetic depletion becomes severe. Depression sets in, but not the kind that responds to conventional treatment. This is spiritual depression, poverty of life force. In the fifth stage, the person becomes a shell, going through motions with no real presence. And this pattern spreads because sexual energy exists not only within individuals, but between them, creating fields that entire families and cultures fall into. So what is the protocol? First, consciousness itself is the shield. The moment you bring awareness to your sexual energy, you've begun to change your relationship with it. Start here. For one lunar cycle, simply notice. Notice when desire arises, what triggers it, the quality of energy before, during, and after. Don't judge, just observe. Second, implement strategic withdrawal. Periods of conscious conservation allow energetic reserves to rebuild. During this time, sexual energy doesn't disappear, it begins to move upward. You'll feel increased mental clarity, creative inspiration, vitality pervading your entire being. Third, when you do engage sexually, do it with ritual awareness. Prepare the space as if preparing a temple. Set intention beyond physical pleasure. Breathe deeply, maintain eye contact, slow everything down. And here's the culmination. What we call sexual energy is the creative force of the universe localized in human form. It's the same energy that spins galaxies, drives evolution, creates new life. In you, this cosmic power is concentrated in the sexual center. And you have a choice whether to squander this force in mechanical discharge or consciously direct it toward higher states of consciousness, creative works that outlive your body, genuine spiritual insight. The mystics weren't being prudish, they were being practical. They knew that sexual force, properly directed, is literally the fuel for human transcendence. And in a world designed to keep you unconscious, the simple act of reclaiming your sexual energy becomes revolutionary, an act of rebellion against a civilization built on exploitation of human unconsciousness. Now we descend deeper into the mechanics, into the specific practice that separates those who merely read about transformation from those who undergo it. Retention. The word makes modern people uncomfortable. conjuring Victorian repression, religious guilt, unhealthy suppression. But what I'm speaking of bears no resemblance to these distortions. Conscious retention is not denial of sexual energy, but its deliberate redirection, not damming a river, but constructing channels that carry its power to higher ground. You must get closer to your sexual energy, not further from it. You must feel it more intensely, not less. Only then can you begin to play it, rather than being played by it. The alchemists called this fixing the volatile, and they meant something precise. Conversion of gross energy into subtle energy, of lower vibration into higher, of sexual force into spiritual illumination. Scientific validation exists, scattered across decades of research. The work of Masters and Johnson inadvertently documented male, non-ejaculatory orgasm. Men who learn to experience full-body orgasmic states without ejaculatory release. Research at Rutgers, using fMRI, showed these non-ejaculatory orgasms activated far more extensive brain regions than conventional orgasms, particularly areas associated with higher cognition and mystical experience. Studies on Taoist practitioners revealed measurable differences in hormonal profiles. Testosterone remained stable rather than dropping post-orgasm. Prolactin stayed balanced. Most intriguingly, oxytocin and vasopressin remained elevated for days rather than hours. The endocrine system, when sexual energy is retained and circulated, functions fundamentally differently. Every authentic tradition encoded this. The tantric texts speak of urdhvareta, the upward-flowing semen, not as literal physical reversal, but as energetic ascension, cultivation of ojas, the vital essence that grants extraordinary clarity in spiritual perception. Taoist texts are explicit. If one can emit without emitting, one's essence will be internally strengthened. If one emits, one will inevitably become fatigued. The practice they describe, returning the essence to nourish the brain, was the foundation of both longevity and enlightenment. In Christian mystical tradition, Augustine's concept of directing Cupiditas toward Caritas was understood by initiates as sexual transmutation. Medieval alchemical texts, with their obsession with philosophical mercury and secret fire, were veiled descriptions of working with sexual energy. But here's where most people fail, where the practice becomes dangerous without proper attention. True retention is relaxed, spacious, natural. It doesn't involve forceful clenching or muscular tension. The moment you're straining, you're not retaining, you're suppressing, and suppression creates the unhealthy pressure critics rightly warn against. Signs of proper retention are unmistakable. Increased energy, mental clarity, groundedness combined with inspiration, a fullness that feels like coming home. Signs of improper retention are equally clear. Irritability, tension, obsessive thoughts, a sense of pressure needing release. The difference is consciousness. Are you fighting sexuality or transforming it? If retention makes you aggressive, judgmental, spiritually proud, you're doing it wrong. If it makes you more patient, compassionate, creative, present, you're on track. The stages unfold like sacred curriculum. In the beginning, you simply become aware retention is possible. Even a week of conscious conservation feels like revelation. You notice energy stabilizing, needing less sleep, senses sharpening. In the second stage, you extend the period and notice energy accumulating in the lower abdomen. You feel warmth, pressure, fullness. In the third stage, you learn to circulate this energy through breath, visualization, specific exercises, moving accumulated energy up the spine. This is the microcosmic orbit, and it's surprisingly tangible. In the fourth stage, circulation becomes spontaneous. The energy knows pathways and travels them naturally. Meditation deepens dramatically. Insights arrive unbidden. In the fifth stage, you discover the capacity for full orgasmic states without any dissipation. Orgasms that don't end but sustain, that don't drain but energize, opening portals into transcendent consciousness. And this practice radiates outward, naturally influencing everything it touches. Partners practicing retention together report relationship dynamics that sound like fantasy, deepening intimacy over years, sexual experiences becoming progressively profound, energetic fusion transcending the physical. Families where parents understand these principles create fundamentally different atmospheres. More peaceful, more vital, more conscious, less underlying depletion and exhausted irritability. On collective levels, cultures preserving these teachings developed elaborate systems for channeling sexual energy towards spiritual goals, temple building, artistic creation, philosophical investigation. The Renaissance explosion of creativity coincided with esoteric orders teaching sexual magic to initiates. When individual sexual energy is consciously retained and directed, it becomes civilizational fuel. Conversely, civilization decline consistently correlates with sexuality's profanation, its reduction to mere recreation. The protection protocol is straightforward but non-negotiable. Never approach retention as willpower endurance test. That's ego, not transmutation. balance is everything. This practice exists within larger context of physical health, emotional development, relational maturity. If you're using retention to avoid intimacy or feed spiritual superiority, you're creating psychological problems. Understand that retention amplifies everything. Unresolved psychological material will surface with uncomfortable intensity. Many people need to combine this with shadow work or therapy. Find guidance from someone who has walked this path. Give yourself permission to release when necessary. This isn't about never having orgasms, but having them consciously, deliberately, when energetically appropriate rather than compulsively. We arrive at the philosophical heart. What you do with sexual energy is what you do with life force itself, and this determines what becomes possible for consciousness evolution. Sexual organs are not separate from spiritual development, they're central to it. The creative power that makes babies can make enlightened states, but only if consciously directed. This is why great yogis and mystics, whether celibate or sexually active, all mastered this principle. They understood spiritual realization requires tremendous, sustained energy. Where does that energy come from? From the same source, ordinary people dissipate thoughtlessly until they reach life's end, wondering why they never experienced transcendent states they read about. The answer is simple. They bled out their spiritual fuel before it could accumulate to critical mass. Retention isn't the goal, consciousness transformation is, but retention is the means, the alchemical vessel, where transformation occurs. We shift now from what you withhold to what you bring, from retention to presence. And here the teaching becomes paradoxical because presence cannot be practiced like a skill. Presence is what remains when all technique falls away, when the performing self dissolves, when there's no longer anyone trying to do sexuality correctly, and there is only raw, immediate reality of two bodies meeting, two nervous systems synchronizing, two consciousness fields interpenetrating. But here's the difficulty. Our minds never stop. Internal narrative never ceases. And so we're almost never actually present for experiences we're having. During sex especially, the mind fragments into 1,000 directions. You're thinking about how you look, whether you're performing adequately, what your partner is thinking, comparing this to past experiences, monitoring your responses, maintaining an image. Meanwhile, the actual experience passes by largely unnoticed, and afterward you wonder why sex feels good but somehow hollow. The neuroscience of presence during sex is fascinating and barely explored. Research at the University of Montreal examining brain activity during orgasm found something unexpected. During conventional orgasm, parts of the brain associated with self-awareness and social judgment shut down temporarily, explaining the loss of self-consciousness that makes orgasm pleasurable. But when they studied experienced Tantra practitioners, they found something entirely different. During what practitioners described as expanded orgasmic states, the prefrontal cortex didn't shut down. Instead, it entered unique synchronized activity with the limbic system, a state normally only observed during peak experiences like profound meditation or psychedelic journeys. The default mode network showed dramatic reduction. Practitioners were simultaneously more conscious and less self-conscious, more aware but less identified with awareness. This is the neuroscientific signature of presence: high awareness, low self-reference. EEG studies show partners engaged in conscious, synchronized sexual practice begin showing correlated brainwave patterns in the theta range, as if nervous systems tune into the same frequency. This isn't metaphor, this is measurable electromagnetic reality. Traditional teachings understood this without brain scanners. Tantric texts describe sexuality as yajna, sacred fire ceremony, where bodies become altar, arousal becomes offering, and presence becomes the flame-transmuting physical union into spiritual communion. Preparation was elaborate. Ritual bathing, pranayama to balance breath, visualization of deity forms, invocation of sacred intention. Why such complexity? Because presence doesn't happen accidentally. It requires preparation, intention, creation of sacred space externally and internally. Taoist texts emphasize Shen, often translated as spirit but more precisely understood as refined awareness, luminous presence. Cultivation of Shen during sexual union was the highest form of dual cultivation because it required both partners to maintain extraordinary awareness while allowing full energetic flow. In Islamic Sufi tradition, esoteric texts describe sexual union as direct taste of fana, the dissolution of separate self that is mysticism's goal. Christian mystics spoke of sexuality as sacrament when approached with reverence. Warning signs that presence is absent are subtle but unmistakable once you know what to look for. During sex, you find your mind wandering. You're present for intense moments, but drift during plateaus. You need fantasy to maintain arousal. You're performing more than feeling, aware of yourself as lover, rather than dissolved into the experience. Afterward, you feel incomplete, like something was missing even if physical mechanics were satisfying. You can't remember specific moments clearly because you weren't fully present for them. There's emptiness, a sense that something beautiful is being wasted, potential not fulfilled. Most people never realize anything is wrong because they've never experienced the alternative. They think sex is supposed to be this way: brief physical pleasure followed by sleepiness, 15 minutes of friction followed by return to ordinary consciousness. They don't know that sex approached with sacred presence can be hours-long journey into expanded states, meditation more profound than sitting, a doorway into direct experience of unity consciousness. Developmental stages of cultivating presence unfold gradually. First stage is simply noticing when you're not present. During sexual encounter, catch yourself thinking rather than feeling, and gently return attention to direct sensation. This alone, practiced consistently, begins changing experience quality. Second stage involves learning to stay present during building phases of arousal, not just peaks. Can you maintain awareness during slow, subtle movements? Can you feel energy gathering? Third stage is using breath as anchor for presence. Synchronized breathing with partner creates almost instant deepening of connection, and breath awareness pulls you out of mental content into bodily reality. Fourth stage involves expanding awareness to include entire body, not just genital sensation. Energy begins moving in waves, circulating rather than concentrating. Whole body orgasms become possible. Fifth stage, accessible only to those who stabilized previous stages, involves transcending even body awareness, entering states where you're no longer sure where your body ends and partner's begins, where consciousness itself seems to be the medium in which sexual experience occurs. And this practice radiates outward inevitably. Couples who learn to be present sexually report that presence infiltrates every relationship aspect. Conversations become deeper. Conflicts resolve more easily because there's less defensiveness, more space to actually hear each other. Presence cultivated in bedroom becomes presence brought to breakfast, to parenting, to work. Children growing up, where parents practice sacred sexuality, absorb something essential. They see what it looks like when adults are truly present with each other, not distracted, not performing, not lost in habitual patterns. This creates a template for their own future relationships. On larger scales, communities understanding these principles develop different cultural atmospheres. There's less grasping, desperate quality characterizing modern dating culture. There's more space, more respect, understanding that sexuality is powerful and therefore deserves conscious engagement rather than casual consumption. The protocol for developing presence is simpler than you might expect, though simple doesn't mean easy. Begin outside bedroom. Practice presence in ordinary moments. When eating, taste your food. When walking, feel your feet. When listening to music, listen with your whole body. Presence is capacity that strengthens with exercise. When approaching sexual activity, create ritual around it. Turn off screens. Set aside time when you won't be interrupted. Light a candle, play specific music, anything that signals we are entering sacred space. Slow everything down. Modern tendency is rushing toward orgasm, but presence requires the opposite. Lingering in each moment, savoring each sensation. Use eye contact even when uncomfortable, especially when uncomfortable, because eye contact is perhaps the most powerful presence practice during sex. You cannot maintain eye contact and remain lost in fantasy simultaneously. Learn to rest in plateau states. Instead of constantly building toward orgasm, experiment with finding arousal level you can sustain, riding that edge. The teaching resolves itself here. Presence is the practice, and presence is the goal. You cultivate presence to become more present, and this circular path eventually reveals that presence itself is the doorway to everything spiritual traditions promise. Unity, consciousness, dissolution of separate self, direct experience of what mystics call God and scientists call unified field, and lovers simply experience as overwhelming grace. Sexual union approached with full presence is nothing less than technology for temporary ego death, method for experiencing boundary dissolution that meditation achieves through stillness and psychedelics achieve through chemistry. But unlike those, sacred sexuality has unique quality of being relational, demonstrating that transcendence doesn't require withdrawal from world, but can happen in midst of most intimate human connection. This is its radical gift, teaching that you don't choose between spiritual awakening and intimate relationship, between transcendence and embodiment, between heaven and earth. In fire of conscious presence, the sacred and sexual reveal themselves as single continuum. There is a secret hidden in your next breath, a power so vast that yogis have spent lifetimes learning to harness it, yet so simple that a child can practice it. Breath is not merely oxygen exchange, not simply mechanical inflation of lungs. Breath is the bridge between body and consciousness, between gross material world and subtle energetic dimension. And when you learn to breathe consciously during sexual activity, you gain access to a control panel most people don't know exists. The ancient masters knew what modern people have forgotten, that breath and sexual energy are intimately connected. That breathing pattern directly determines flow of erotic force through your system, and that specific techniques can amplify sexual experience from mere physical sensation into full-blown mystical states. This is not exaggeration. This is documented technology existing for thousands of years, preserved in lineages that understood human energy body with sophistication, making our modern anatomical knowledge look crude. Scientific basis exists scattered across respiratory physiology and neuroscience. Researchers at Harvard Medical School studying tummo breathing documented ability to consciously control physiological processes, once thought completely autonomic: core body temperature, metabolic rate, even immune function. The mechanism involves activation of sympathetic nervous system through controlled hyperventilation followed by breath retention, creating controlled stress triggering adaptive responses throughout the body. Even more relevant is research on coherent breathing patterns and their effects on heart rate variability. When breathing becomes rhythmic, conscious, synchronized between partners, heart rate variability increases dramatically, indicating shift into parasympathetic dominance where healing occurs and where sexual energy can flow without anxiety interference. Studies at Max Planck Institute found specific breathing patterns activate the insular cortex, brain region, responsible for interoception, sensing internal body states. Strengthening interoception directly enhances ability to feel and direct subtle energy. Research on holotropic breathwork has documented generation of non-ordinary consciousness states indistinguishable from psychedelic journeys, achieved purely through breathing pattern manipulation. Every authentic tantric tradition places breath practice at absolute center of sexual transformation. The term pranayama means literally extension of prana, life force, and while prana is often translated as breath, it more precisely refers to energetic current that breath carries throughout the system. The Vijnana Bhairava Tantra dedicates numerous sutras to breath techniques specifically designed for sexual practice. The supreme breath, where inhalation draws energy up the central channel while exhalation spreads it throughout body. The Shakti breath, where feminine partner leads breath rhythm and masculine follows, creating energetic synchronization. The fire breath, where rapid rhythmic breathing builds heat and intensity, driving energy upward toward higher chakras. Taoist texts describe breathing patterns called internal alchemy, where breath is consciously coordinated with microcosmic orbit meditation, circulating sexual energy through precise pathways. In Tibetan Buddhist tradition, karma mudra, or sexual yoga, is taught only to advanced practitioners precisely because it requires mastery of subtle breathing techniques that, done incorrectly, can create energetic imbalances. Signs that breathing is being ignored during sexuality are obvious once you learn to recognize them. Most people hold breath during arousal, particularly approaching orgasm, creating tension and contraction rather than expansion. You see it in flushed face, rigidity in shoulders, sense of strain rather than flow. This breath holding causes sexual energy to stagnate, concentrating in genitals rather than distributing throughout body, which is why genital orgasms feel intense but brief and localized rather than sustained and systemic. After sex, many breathe shallowly, staying in chest rather than dropping into belly, which keeps nervous system somewhat activated rather than allowing full relaxation. Breathing lacks rhythm, lacks consciousness, becomes automatic the moment attention wanders. You feel yourself getting lost in sensation and simultaneously losing track of breath, which is losing track of the steering wheel of experience. And because breath is automatic, most people never realize conscious breathing during sex is even an option. The progression of breath mastery follows clear curriculum. First stage is simply becoming conscious that you're breathing during sex. During your next sexual encounter, notice your breath. Don't try to change it yet, just notice. You'll discover shocking reality, how much of the time your breathing is either held or completely unconscious. Second stage is learning to maintain deep belly-centered breathing throughout sexual activity. This alone transforms experience because belly breathing activates parasympathetic nervous system, calming performance anxiety while allowing more energy flow. Third stage introduces rhythmic breathing, establishing pace and maintaining it, which entrains energy flow into coherent patterns rather than chaotic spikes. Fourth stage is synchronized breathing with partner, perhaps the most powerful relational practice available. You literally tune nervous systems to same frequency, creating unified energetic field. Fifth stage involves advanced techniques, rapid breath to build energy, followed by retention to concentrate it, alternating nostril breathing to balance masculine and feminine energies, reverse breathing, where belly contracts on inhale and expands on exhale. These practices ripple outward, affecting everything. The individual who learns breath mastery and sexuality finds breath awareness infiltrating daily life. Stressful situations that once triggered automatic reactions now become opportunities to pause, breathe, respond consciously. Nervous system becomes more flexible, resilient, less reactive. For couples, synchronized breathing during sex creates template for attunement in all relationship areas. You become sensitive to partners' rhythms, states, needs, developing almost psychic sensitivity that's actually just highly refined attention. Families where parents practice conscious breathing absorb different emotional atmosphere quality, calmer, more grounded, less susceptible to collective anxiety plaguing modern life. On collective level, systematic teaching of conscious breathing, including in sexual contexts, would represent public health intervention of staggering magnitude. The suffering caused by dysregulated nervous systems, chronic anxiety, depression, stress-related illness is incalculable, and breath practice is one of the most effective, accessible, zero-cost interventions available. The protection protocol is essential because any powerful technique can be misused. Never practice advanced breathing techniques, particularly hyperventilation-based methods or extended retention, without proper instruction from someone who actually knows these practices. Improperly done, these can create energetic disturbances, panic states, even seizure-like activity in predisposed individuals. Always prioritize comfort over technique. If breathing pattern feels forced or creates anxiety, back off, return to simple natural breathing. Goal is expansion, not control through force. Pay attention to partner's state. Synchronized breathing requires both people to be comfortable with pace and depth. Don't impose your rhythm, find rhythm that works for both. Understand that breathing practices amplify everything. If you haven't processed trauma, particularly trauma with sexual component, conscious breathing during sex can bring that material to surface intensely. This is ultimately therapeutic, but requires support. We arrive at philosophical essence of breath work and sexuality. Breath is the most direct way to consciously participate in your own aliveness, and sexuality is the most intense expression of that aliveness available in ordinary consciousness. When you bring conscious breathing to sexual experience, you are consciously participating in life force at peak intensity. And this participation is transformative in ways passive reception could never be. Traditions developing these practices understood something profound, that human beings are not merely biological machines responding to stimuli, but are, in essence, consciousness itself temporarily identifying with form. And breath is the thread connecting awareness to incarnation. When you breathe consciously, you are literally animating yourself, taking responsibility for your own life force. In sexual contexts, where energy is already heightened, conscious breathing becomes a way of steering that energy toward higher chakras, toward expanded consciousness, toward states of unity and transcendence that are your birthright but require practice to access consistently. The oxygen you're breathing carries prana, chi, life force, the energetic dimension. Scientific materialism hasn't learned to measure, but anyone can feel through patient practice. After the storm comes stillness, and in that stillness lies a secret most people rush past in their haste to return to ordinary consciousness. The moments immediately following orgasm or intense sexual arousal represent one of the most potent windows for spiritual experience available to human beings, a naturally occurring altered state that nearly everyone accesses, but almost no one knows how to use. The conventional pattern is familiar. Build up, peak, release, then immediate return to mundane concerns, rolling over to check your phone, getting up to clean up, falling asleep, anything to avoid the intensity of simply staying present with whatever is arising in the vulnerable openness following sexual climax. But ancient traditions teach something radically different, that the post-orgasmic state is not the ending of sacred sexual practice, but rather its culmination. The moment when doorways you've opened through arousal and energy circulation can finally be walked through if you have discipline to remain still, present, receptive to what wants to emerge from the depths. Neuroscientific research on post-orgasmic states is surprisingly robust, though implications are rarely explored fully. Studies using fMRI and PT scans have mapped the neurochemical cascade following orgasm. Massive releases of oxytocin and prolactin, decreases in cortisol, temporary deactivation of amygdala and large portions of prefrontal cortex, particularly regions involved in self-referential processing and social judgment. In other words, after orgasm, your brain temporarily looks like the brain of someone in deep meditation or under psychedelic influence. Usual filters are down, ego structure is relaxed, boundaries that normally separate self from other become permeable. Research at University of Groningen found post-orgasmic refractory period involves unique brain state characterized by increased activity in orbital prefrontal cortex and decreased activity in amygdala, pattern associated with feelings of satiation and bonding, but also states of open receptivity to new information. The pineal gland shows increased metabolic activity in period following intense sexual arousal, suggesting the body's own psychedelic pharmacy may be activated. EEG studies of experienced tantric practitioners show they can maintain theta wave dominance for extended periods following sexual activity, suggesting that, with training, post-orgasmic state can be prolonged into sustained mystical experience. Every traditional system that took sexuality seriously understood importance of post-coital period. Tantric texts speak of shavasana, corpse pose, practiced immediately after sexual union, both partners lying completely still, allowing energy they've generated to settle and integrate rather than dispersing through movement. This wasn't mere rest, it was advanced meditation practice because combination of deep relaxation and heightened energy creates optimal conditions for spontaneous samadhi states. Instructions are precise. Remain still, breathe naturally, place no effort on maintaining awareness, but don't fall asleep either. Simply rest in aftermath, observing whatever arises without grasping or pushing away. Taoist masters taught the gathering, practice of lying still after sexual activity and consciously drawing dispersed sexual energy back toward lower dantian, consolidating rather than dissipating generated force. They understood minutes following arousal are when energy is most malleable, most responsive to conscious direction, and this window closes quickly, usually within 10 to 20 minutes. In Kabbalistic tradition, sexual magic always included elaborate instructions for post-union period, often involving visualization of Sephirotic tree, seeing energy rise from Yesod through Tifereth toward Kether. Signs that this crucial period is being wasted are everywhere in modern sexual culture. There's immediate restlessness, need to do something, anything, to discharge intensity of what you're feeling. Awkwardness arises, particularly with partners who aren't deeply bonded. Self-consciousness, making stillness uncomfortable. Mind immediately starts chattering, analyzing performance, planning what comes next, wandering to unrelated concerns. There's no training, no cultural support for simply remaining present in vulnerability and openness following sexual release. Instead, there's often protective closing, hardening back into defended self, particularly for men whose cultural conditioning teaches that vulnerability is weakness. You see couples who were just intimately united suddenly distant, each retreating into phone or thoughts. Magical space created collapsing within minutes. Tragic thing is that this is when real gifts often arrive. Spontaneous insights about yourself or your life, feelings of profound love and connection touching something universal, sometimes actual visions or intuitions proving accurate, experiences of unity consciousness, where sense of being separate self temporarily dissolves into something vast and peaceful. But these gifts come only to those who have learned to wait, to be still. Stages of mastery in working with post-coital states build gradually. First stage is simply extending period of stillness from 0 to something, even 5 minutes. After sexual activity, instead of immediately moving or talking or sleeping, both partners agree to simply lie still, perhaps touching, perhaps not. Just breathing and being present with energy, still moving through systems. This alone trains nervous system to tolerate and explore states of high energy, combined with low activity, precisely the combination opening doors to expanded awareness. Second stage involves learning to track energy as it moves through your body in stillness. You'll feel it as warmth, tingling, waves of sensation traveling from genitals upward toward heart and head. Simply observing these movements begins to map your energetic anatomy experientially. Third stage introduces visualization practices. With eyes closed, you might visualize light moving up central channel of spine, or see yourself and partner connected by streams of energy. Fourth stage is characterized by spontaneous visions, insights, experiences of expanded consciousness, arriving unbidden. You're not trying to make anything happen, you're simply providing conditions. Fifth stage involves maintaining continuous awareness through entire cycle. Arousal, climax, post-orgasmic integration, returning to ordinary consciousness, all experienced as single flowing process. This practice extends influence beyond bedroom. Learning to be still and present in post-orgasmic vulnerability teaches you to be still and present in other vulnerable moments. After difficult conversations, after receiving challenging news, after any intensity where habitual response is to immediately close down. Capacity to remain open, to not prematurely conclude experience, to let things integrate at their own pace, this capacity becomes generalized. For couples, practice of conscious post-coital stillness creates profound bonding going far beyond physical act. This is when you're most open to each other, when defenses are down and hearts are accessible. Real communication often happens in these moments. Partners report, this time becomes emotional and spiritual heart of their sexual connection, more valuable than orgasm itself. On collective level, restoration of this practice would represent massive shift in consciousness. We would move from sexuality as primarily recreational to sexuality as genuinely transformative, access point to deeper dimensions of being. The protocol for working with post-orgasmic states is straightforward but requires discipline. First, communicate with partner beforehand about intention to remain still and present for period after sexual activity. Make sure both are in agreement. Second, create environmental support. Dim lighting helps shift into internal focus, comfortable temperature so you're not distracted, privacy so you don't worry about interruption. Third, set minimum time frame, perhaps 10 minutes for beginners, 20 or 30 for experienced practitioners. Fourth, do not force any particular experience. Whole point is receptivity, not creation. If visions come, fine. If insights arise, fine. If you simply feel peaceful or nothing in particular, also fine. Practice is creating space, not filling it with content you think should be there. Fifth, consider keeping journal nearby to record whatever emerges. Some of most profound insights arrive in these states, but evaporate quickly if not captured. We arrive at deepest truth, that silence is not empty but full, that stillness is not absence of something but presence of everything, and that post-orgasmic void you're usually eager to fill is actually womb of consciousness itself, pregnant with possibilities that can never emerge if you don't give them space and time to gestate. Mystics speak of cloud of unknowing, dark night of soul, pregnant void, different metaphors pointing to same truth, that most profound experiences occur not in light of certainty, but in darkness of not knowing. Sexual climax strips you naked not just physically, but psychologically, energetically, spiritually. All your usual armor falls away. You are in that moment as vulnerable and open as you ever get. And what follows, if you have courage to not immediately cover yourself again with familiar garments of ego, is opportunity to see what you actually are beneath all costumes, all roles, all stories you tell about yourself. Sometimes what you see is beautiful, sometimes disturbing, sometimes incomprehensible, but always genuine in a way that ordinary self-perception never quite is. Visions arising in post-orgasmic stillness are not hallucinations. They are genuine perceptions of energetic and psychic realities always present, but usually invisible because your normal consciousness is too contracted, too defended, too busy to perceive them. Here we confront perhaps the most misunderstood dimension of sacred sexuality, the relationship between desire itself and spiritual awakening. The conventional religious approach has been to demonize desire, to see it as obstacle to transcendence, something to be overcome, suppressed, mortified, through discipline and denial. But the esoteric traditions teach something far more sophisticated, that desire is not the enemy, but rather raw material for transformation, that the same force pulling you towards sexual gratification can, through conscious work, become the very fuel propelling you toward enlightenment. This is the secret the mystics encoded in symbols like the serpent eating its tail, the phoenix rising from flames, the lotus growing from mud. Transformation doesn't happen by rejecting lower nature, but by sublimating it, raising it, transmuting it through the alchemical fire of consciousness. And sexual desire, being the most intense and universal form of desire, becomes the primary laboratory for this work. The neuroscience of desire transformation is emerging from research on addiction, meditation, and neuroplasticity. Studies at UCLA using functional imaging have shown that the same neural pathways activated by desire for food, drugs, or sex can be gradually reconditioned through mindfulness practices. The key appears to be creating space between stimulus and response, between arising of desire and automatic reaction to it. When subjects were taught to observe desires without immediately acting on them, researchers documented increased gray matter density in prefrontal regions associated with self-regulation and decreased reactivity in reward centers like the nucleus accumbens. More intriguingly, research on long-term meditators shows that the relationship between desire and suffering, so central to Buddhist psychology, has neurological correlates. Advanced practitioners show unique patterns when experiencing desire. High activation in awareness centers combined with low activation in craving circuits. They feel desire fully but aren't compelled by it, creating that spacious relationship the traditions describe as liberation. Studies on sublimation, the psychoanalytic concept of redirecting base drives toward higher purposes, have found evidence that people who successfully channel sexual energy into creative or spiritual pursuits show distinct patterns of dopaminergic activity compared to those who don't. The traditional teachings on desire transformation are remarkably consistent across cultures. In Tantra, desire is called kama, and rather than being rejected, it's worshipped as a form of Shakti, divine feminine energy. The practice involves feeling desire completely, fully embodying it, but simultaneously maintaining witness consciousness, observing the desire without being identified with it. This creates what they call the razor's edge, feeling everything while attached to nothing. The key technical term is neither suppression nor indulgence, a middle way requiring exquisite balance. Taoist sexual alchemy speaks of transforming Jing, sexual essence, into Qi, life force, and ultimately into Shen, spirit. The process is described as developmental. First, you work with gross physical energy, then subtle energetic currents, finally with pure consciousness itself. Each level requires different relationship to desire, At gross level, you learn restraint. At subtle level, you learn circulation. At refined level, desire and desirelessness reveal themselves as two sides of same coin, and transcendence occurs. In Christian mysticism, particularly in John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila, sexual desire is acknowledged as powerful force that can be directed toward divine love. The language is veiled, but the meaning is clear to those initiated. The same longing that drives you toward physical union can drive you toward mystical union if you learn to recognize its true object. The warning signs of corrupted relationship to desire are everywhere, but rarely recognized as such. You notice desire has become compulsive, arising not from genuine appetite, but from anxiety, boredom, emptiness. The satisfaction of desire brings no real fulfillment, just temporary relief, followed by return of craving. You find yourself planning the next sexual experience before the current one is even finished. There's a quality of desperation, of grasping, that colors your sexuality. You're using sex to escape rather than to connect, to numb rather than to feel. The desire itself becomes uncomfortable because you're simultaneously drawn to it and repelled by your own craving, creating internal conflict that manifests as guilt, shame, or aggressive pursuit. You lose the capacity to simply be with desire without acting on it, feeling like you'll explode or go crazy if you don't get release. This isn't natural desire, this is addiction, and the difference is crucial. Natural desire arises, peaks, and subsides like a wave. Addictive craving is constant, demanding, never satisfied no matter how often you feed it. Most people today live in the second state without realizing it, thinking their relationship to desire is normal when it's actually pathological. The stages of sacralization unfold as progressive initiations. In the first stage, you simply become aware that you have desires, rather than being your desires. You notice there's desire present rather than I want. This tiny shift in perspective is revolutionary. In the second stage, you learn to feel desire fully without immediately acting on it. You sit with arousal, explore it, become intimate with its textures and flavors. This teaches you that desire isn't dangerous, doesn't need to be suppressed or immediately gratified. In the third stage, you begin directing desire consciously. When sexual desire arises, you can choose to channel that energy into creative work, physical exercise, meditation, rather than automatically seeking sexual outlet. You discover desire is actually energy, and energy can be directed. In the fourth stage, desire becomes devotional. Sexual attraction to partner transforms into worship, seeing them as manifestation of divine principle. The erotic becomes sacred automatically. In the fifth stage, all desire reveals itself as desire for union with Source, for return to original wholeness, and every particular desire is recognized as disguised spiritual longing. At this level, the distinction between sacred and profane collapses. And this transformation, like everything genuinely alchemical, radiates effects far beyond the individual. Couples who learn to sacralize desire together report that their entire relational dynamic shifts. There's less neediness, less manipulation, less using each other to fill inner emptiness. Instead, sexual connection becomes offering, gift, celebration of something larger than both partners. Children raised by parents who have transformed their relationship to desire absorb capacity for healthy wanting, for feeling deeply without being controlled by feelings. They learn by example that it's possible to have strong desires and strong self-regulation simultaneously. On societal level, systematic teaching of desire transformation would address addiction epidemic at its root. Most addictions are corrupted expressions of desire for transcendence, for wholeness, for something beyond the limited self. When people learn to work with desire consciously, particularly sexual desire, as the most powerful and accessible form, they naturally develop capacity to handle other desires skillfully. The compulsive consumption characterizing modern culture, the endless chasing after next thing that promises satisfaction but never delivers, all of this is fundamentally mishandled desire. Teaching people to sacralize desire would be teaching them to come home to themselves. The protocol for this work is both simple and demanding. First, make a commitment to consciousness around desire for a specific period, perhaps one lunar month. Every time sexual desire arises, pause before acting. Simply feel it for 60 seconds without moving toward gratification. Notice where you feel it in your body, what thoughts accompany it, what you're really hungry for beneath the surface desire. Second, begin treating your sexual energy as sacred through ritual. Before any sexual activity, take a moment to set intention beyond mere pleasure. Dedicate the experience to something: love, growth, healing, awakening. This simple act begins alchemical transformation. Third, practice desire without object. Sit in meditation and allow yourself to feel raw desire, that pulling, yearning, longing quality, but without directing it toward any particular person or outcome. Feel the energy of desire itself. This teaches you that desire is not need for a specific thing, but is actually energy-seeking expression. Fourth, when desire becomes overwhelming, use it for creativity. Write, paint, dance, sing, channel that intense energy into making something. You'll discover that sexual energy and creative energy are the same thing. Fifth, study your patterns. Keep journal of when desire arises, what triggers it, how you typically respond. Understanding your unique relationship to desire is necessary for transforming it. We arrive at the ultimate recognition, simultaneously simple and shattering, that desire is not separate from you. It is the life force itself moving through you, and resisting it is resisting your own aliveness, while unconsciously indulging it is remaining trapped in mechanical reaction. The middle way, the razor's edge the traditions speak of, is consciously participating in desire, feeling it fully while directing it consciously, allowing it to move you without controlling you. This is the secret that unlocks everything. Sexual desire is not base or shameful. It's literally divine creative force temporarily focused on specific objects. When you learn to feel that force without being compelled by it, without reacting automatically, you gain access to power that can transform everything it touches. The traditions that understood this created entire spiritual paths based on this single principle, that the same energy most people waste in unconscious sexuality can, when conserved and redirected, fuel the journey to enlightenment. This isn't suppression. It's intelligent use of resources. You don't reject desire, you marry it to awareness, and from that marriage is born something that transcends both. The awakened human being who can feel everything, want nothing, and create from that paradoxical freedom what unconscious people, trapped in endless cycles of desire and dissatisfaction, could never dream of creating. This is the promise, and this is the practice. Sacralizing desire by bringing it into full consciousness, letting light of awareness transform what was automatic into what is deliberate, what was compulsive into what is sacred. Sexual intimacy is perhaps the most revealing mirror available to human consciousness, reflecting back to you not only who you are, but who you pretend to be. Not only your light, but your carefully hidden shadows. Not only your desires, but your fears. Not only your capacity for love, but your wounds around receiving it. In the vulnerability of sexual union, all masks fall away. All pretense becomes impossible to maintain, and what emerges is raw truth about your psychological state, your level of development, your unprocessed trauma, your defended places. But most people never use sexuality this way. They use it for pleasure, for connection, for validation, for release. And while these are legitimate purposes, they miss the profound opportunity sexuality offers. To see yourself with brutal honesty through the reflection your partner provides. The ancient mystery schools understood this, which is why sexual practices were always embedded in broader psychological and spiritual work. Sex without self-knowledge is just friction. Sex with self-knowledge becomes transformation. The psychological research validating sexuality as mirror is extensive, though scattered. Attachment theory research, pioneered by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, and extended by researchers like Cindy Hazan, has demonstrated that your attachment style, formed in early childhood relationships, predictably manifests in your sexual relationships. Anxious attachment shows up as neediness, constant seeking of reassurance, fear of abandonment. Avoidant attachment manifests as emotional distance even during physical intimacy, discomfort with vulnerability, tendency to withdraw after sex. Disorganized attachment creates confusing patterns of simultaneous seeking and fleeing intimacy. Studies using self-report and observational methods show remarkable consistency. The way you relate sexually directly mirrors your early relational templates. Research on projection, the psychological defense mechanism where you attribute your own unacknowledged qualities to others, has found that sexual relationships are primary sites for projective processes, qualities you can't accept in yourself, you see in your partner and react to strongly. Research in neuroscience of empathy and mirror neurons suggests that during intimate contact, particularly during sex, neural resonance between partners creates conditions where each person literally feels the other's state, making it impossible to hide your authentic emotional reality even if your words or actions attempt to. Traditional teachings understood sexuality as revealing mirror long before modern psychology. In tantric practice, one of the primary reasons for working with a sexual partner rather than practicing alone is precisely this mirror function. The partner reflects back your narcissism, your selfishness, your control needs, your inability to surrender, your performance anxiety, all the ego structures you've built to defend against genuine intimacy. The practice is designed to bring these defenses into consciousness, where they can be worked with, rather than remaining unconscious where they run your life. Taoist dual cultivation texts explicitly state that you choose partner, not primarily for pleasure, but for mutual revelation, finding someone who can see you clearly and reflect that seeing back. In Jungian psychology, which Carl Jung himself acknowledged was deeply influenced by alchemical and tantric traditions, the concept of projection and shadow work is central. Jung taught that intimate relationships, particularly sexual ones, are where shadow material inevitably constellates. You attract partners who carry the qualities you've disowned in yourself, and the work is to recognize the projection, own the disowned material, and integrate it back into conscious personality. Even in Buddhist psychology, the teaching on pratyaya samutpada, dependent origination, implies that nothing exists in isolation. Everything arises in relationship. And therefore, relationship is primary sight for seeing how your mind constructs reality. The signs that sexuality is functioning as mirror are often uncomfortable to acknowledge. You notice yourself reacting strongly to things your partner does sexually, and the intensity of your reaction is disproportionate to what's actually happening. This is a sign that something has been triggered in you, some old wound or defended place. You find yourself repeating the same patterns across different relationships, attracting the same type of person or encountering the same problems, suggesting pattern exists in you, not just in your choice of partners. During or after sex, you feel emotions you can't explain: sudden sadness, inexplicable anger, overwhelming fear, intense shame. These aren't random. They're emergence of unconscious material that sexual vulnerability has brought to the surface. You notice your partner criticizing qualities in you that you secretly fear are true. This is uncomfortable because criticism is hitting defended place where you're not yet able to acknowledge what's there. You experience conflicts that seem to be about sex, but are actually about deeper issues: power, control, trust, worthiness. Sex becomes the battleground where unresolved psychological material fights itself out. Many people avoid this mirror function entirely by keeping sexuality superficial, refusing to let it touch the deeper places, using technique and performance to maintain distance even during apparent intimacy. The developmental stages of using sexuality as mirror progress from unconscious to conscious. In the first stage, you're completely identified with your reactions and patterns. Things happen, you react, and you have no idea why or that there's even anything to look at. The pattern is invisible because you are the pattern. In the second stage, you begin noticing patterns but still blame them on external circumstances or your partner. If only they would do this differently, I wouldn't feel this way. The pattern becomes visible, but you're not yet taking responsibility for your part in creating it. In the third stage, you start recognizing that you have internal triggers, that your reactions say more about you than about what's happening externally. You begin asking, what in me is creating this experience? This is a critical shift from victim consciousness to responsibility. In the fourth stage, you actively use sexual experiences to explore your inner landscape. When something difficult arises, you get curious rather than defensive. You ask your partner to help you see what you can't see in yourself. In the fifth stage, sexuality becomes primary spiritual practice precisely because it's the most effective mirror available. Every encounter reveals something, and you've developed capacity to work with what's revealed without being overwhelmed or defensive. And this practice of using sexuality as mirror creates ripples extending far beyond individual psychology. Couples who commit to this work together develop extraordinary intimacy because they're seeing and being seen at the deepest levels. There's no need for pretense, no energy wasted maintaining false images. Conflicts become opportunities for mutual revelation rather than threats to relationship. Partners become allies in each other's psychological and spiritual development rather than adversaries competing for needs to be met. Children raised by parents doing this work absorb fundamentally different relational templates. They see that intimacy means revealing yourself authentically rather than performing who you think you should be. They learn that conflict isn't dangerous, but can be a doorway to deeper understanding. On a collective level, if this approach to sexuality were taught broadly, it would revolutionize mental health. So much suffering comes from unconscious patterns running unchecked, from wounds we don't know we have, driving behaviors we don't understand. Sexuality, approached as mirror, becomes free therapy available to anyone with the courage to look at what it reveals. But this requires cultural shift from sexuality as entertainment or transaction to sexuality as sacred psychological work, and we're nowhere near that shift yet, though individuals and small communities are pioneering it. The protocol for this practice requires courage and commitment. First, find a partner willing to do this work with you. This practice cannot be done alone and cannot be done with a partner who isn't equally committed to using sexuality for self-knowledge. Second, establish practice of checking in before and after sexual encounters. Before, what am I bringing into this space? What's my emotional state? What am I hoping for? After, what came up for me? What did I notice? What felt difficult? Third, when strong reactions arise during sex, don't push through or pretend everything's fine. Stop, communicate, explore what's happening. The reaction is the gold, the doorway to something that needs attention. Fourth, consider working with therapists, particularly someone trained in somatic or sex therapy, who can help you process what emerges. Some material is too intense to work with alone or only with partner. Fifth, study your patterns systematically. Keep journal of what consistently arises in sexual contexts. What roles do you play? What do you avoid? What repeats? Sixth, practice owning your projections. When you notice yourself criticizing or resenting something in your partner, ask, is this quality also in me, disowned and projected outward? We arrive at the profound truth that sexuality strips you naked, not just physically, but psychologically. And this nakedness is either terrifying or liberating depending on your relationship to your own depths. The mirror sexuality provides is merciless precisely because it's so intimate. You can maintain facades in professional life, even in friendship, but in sexual vulnerability, with another human being literally inside your body or you inside theirs, with defenses down and nervous systems merged, the truth of who you are emerges whether you want it to or not. This is why many people unconsciously keep their sexuality superficial, mechanical, disconnected from emotion. It's protective strategy against the mirror. But those with courage to look, who use sexuality as it was designed to be used in the sacred traditions, as portal to self-knowledge, discover that every wound the mirror reveals is actually doorway to healing. Every shadow shown is opportunity for integration. Every defended place touched is invitation to greater wholeness. The partner becomes teacher, sexuality becomes curriculum, and the bedroom becomes temple, where the great work of becoming conscious occurs not through abstract meditation, but through the most intimate, vulnerable, revealing form of human contact. This is why traditions encoded sexual practices in their highest teachings. Not because they were obsessed with sex, but because they understood it's the fastest, most direct, most unavoidable path to seeing yourself as you actually are beneath all the layers of conditioning, defense, and pretense. And once you see yourself truly, transformation becomes possible, even inevitable. Here we touch one of the most controversial and misunderstood aspects of sacred sexuality, the deliberate practice of sexual abstinence, not as permanent state, but as strategic tool for accumulating and amplifying life force. The word abstinence carries baggage in modern context, associated with religious repression, sexual shame, life-denying asceticism. But what I'm describing has nothing to do with these distortions. Strategic abstinence is more like fasting than starvation, more like athletic training than mortification of flesh. Just as you wouldn't eat constantly even though food is good and necessary, and just as you don't lift weights every single day, even though strength training is beneficial, so too does sexual energy benefit from periods of conservation followed by conscious expression. The ancient masters who developed these practices weren't sex negative, they were deeply sex positive in ways modern culture hasn't begun to understand. They valued sexual energy so highly that they refused to waste it, understanding it as a precious resource requiring careful management. The scientific basis for benefits of periodic sexual abstinence is emerging from multiple research streams. Studies on neurochemical recovery after orgasm show that various neurotransmitter systems require time to return to baseline. Dopamine receptors upregulate with rest, serotonin rebalances, prolactin levels that spike post-orgasm and can remain elevated for days gradually normalize. Research on testosterone shows complex relationship with sexual activity. Initial abstinence of several days actually increases testosterone, though extremely prolonged abstinence may eventually decrease it. The optimal pattern appears to be rhythmic rather than constant activity or constant abstinence. Studies on sperm quality show measurable improvements with periods of retention followed by release. Not surprising, since the body needs time to produce highest quality genetic material. More intriguingly, research on no-fat phenomenon, where men report dramatic life improvements after stopping masturbation and pornography, while often dismissed as placebo, has some support in addiction neuroscience literature, showing that chronic overstimulation of reward circuits reduces baseline dopamine receptor availability, making ordinary life feel flat and unmotivating. Periods of abstinence allow receptor upregulation and restoration of normal reward sensitivity. Every traditional system included periods of sexual abstinence as essential component of practice. In classical Tantra, brahmacharya, or celibacy, was often required initial training stage before more advanced sexual practices were taught. This served multiple purposes. It allowed accumulation of energy, it tested commitment, it developed capacity for containing intense states without discharge. Taoist texts recommend rhythmic cycles tied to lunar phases, with longer retention periods during certain times for building internal power. In yogic traditions, prolonged brahmacharya was considered essential for kundalini awakening because the energy required for that process is the same energy ordinarily lost through sexual activity. If you're constantly dissipating through orgasm, you never accumulate critical mass needed for transformation. In Christian monasticism, celibacy was practical technology, not just moral requirement. Monks knew they needed every ounce of energy for prayer, contemplation, service. In shamanic traditions worldwide, periods of sexual abstinence before ceremonies and vision quests are universal, understood as necessary preparation for entering non-ordinary states. Even in martial arts traditions, fighters often practice sexual abstinence before important competitions, knowing intuitively what science now confirms, that sexual energy and warrior energy are the same energy, and you can't spend your reserves in bedroom and still have them available in the ring. The signs that you need period of abstinence are usually clear if you're honest with yourself. You notice your sexual activity has become compulsive, driven more by anxiety or boredom than genuine desire. You feel depleted rather than energized after sex. Your creative projects have stalled. Your meditation practice has become difficult, mind more scattered, attention more fragmented. You're irritable, low energy, experiencing that flatness where nothing seems particularly interesting or enjoyable. Your sleep is disrupted. Your relationships feel draining. These are symptoms of chronic energetic depletion. And while they can have other causes, sexual overexpenditure is often a significant factor, especially for men, but increasingly for women as well in our hypersexualized culture. The problem is that our culture provides no framework for understanding this connection, so people attribute these symptoms to stress, depression, getting older, never suspecting that their sexual patterns might be literally draining their life force. They might try antidepressants, stimulants, various supplements, never addressing actual root cause. They're hemorrhaging energy through excessive sexual discharge. The stages of skillful abstinence practice follow clear progression. First stage is simply extending your normal pattern slightly. If you typically have sex or masturbate every day, try every other day. If every other day, try twice a week. Don't make dramatic changes immediately, work gradually. Notice what happens as you extend time between sexual releases. You'll probably notice increased energy, better sleep, sharper mental function. Second stage is deliberate periods of abstinence, perhaps 1 week per month or aligned with specific goals or cycles. Mark it on calendar, commit to it, treat it as important practice. During these periods, notice the energy accumulating, particularly in lower abdomen. This is what traditions mean by building your foundation. Third stage involves learning to contain high levels of arousal without release. You might engage in sexual activity with partner, but stop before orgasm. This is advanced practice requiring excellent communication and self-control. Fourth stage is extended periods of abstinence, perhaps 30, 60, 90 days, undertaken with specific intention for transformation. This level should only be attempted after mastering earlier stages, and preferably with guidance from teacher or community of practitioners. Fifth stage is capacity to choose consciously in each moment whether to express or conserve sexual energy based on what serves your highest purpose, no longer bound by either compulsion or rigid rules. And this practice creates effects extending far beyond individual energy management. Couples who practice rhythmic abstinence together report that their sexual encounters become progressively more intense and meaningful. There's actual hunger rather than routine. Anticipation builds. When they do come together sexually, it's event rather than habit. Many report this saves their sex life from becoming stale. For individuals, periods of abstinence often correlate with breakthroughs in other life areas. Business success, artistic achievement, spiritual insight. This isn't coincidence, it's redirection of energy from sexual expression to other forms of creativity. On collective level, understanding strategic abstinence as tool rather than dysfunction would help address various modern sexual pathologies: pornography addiction, compulsive masturbation, hookup culture that leaves people feeling empty. These are all symptoms of culture that has lost wisdom about energy management, that treats sexual expression as right to be exercised constantly rather than resource, to be stewarded carefully. The protocol for abstinence practice is straightforward but requires genuine commitment. First, determine your intention. Why are you doing this? Vague goals like, I should probably, don't work. You need clear purpose, to build energy for a specific project, to reset your system, to deepen meditation practice, to strengthen relationship by creating erotic charge. Second, set clear time frame with definite endpoint. Open-ended abstinence usually fails because it feels like deprivation rather than chosen practice. Third, structure your environment for success. If pornography is trigger, block it. If certain situations lead to sexual activity, avoid them during practice period. Fourth, have plan for managing accumulated sexual energy. Physical exercise, creative work, meditation, breath practices. All of these help channel energy productively. Fifth, if you have partner, ensure they're supportive of practice or ideally participating with you. Trying to practice abstinence while partner isn't on board creates relational tension. Sixth, track your experience. Journal about what you notice: energy levels, mood, creativity, dreams, meditation quality. This data helps you understand your unique relationship with sexual energy. We arrive at essential teaching that energy is a finite resource requiring intelligent management, and sexual energy is your most potent energy, the fuel for everything else you want to do, create, or become. Modern culture's more is better attitude toward sexuality is as absurd as it would be toward eating or exercising or any other domain where excess becomes destructive. The wisdom traditions understood rhythm, periods of activity and rest, expression and conservation, discharge and accumulation. Just as music requires silence between notes to be music rather than noise, sexuality requires space to remain sacred rather than becoming mechanical. Strategic abstinence creates that space. It allows accumulated energy to build to levels where transformation becomes possible. It resets your system, upregulating sensitivity that chronic stimulation has dulled. It restores the sense of sexuality as special rather than ordinary, as sacred rather than casual. And perhaps most importantly, it develops capacity to contain high levels of energy without needing to discharge it, which is a fundamental skill for any serious spiritual work. You cannot maintain expanded states of consciousness if you have no container, no capacity to hold intensity. Strategic abstinence trains that container. It's not about becoming asexual, it's about becoming so fully sexual that you can choose consciously when and how to express that sexuality rather than being driven by unconscious compulsion. This is freedom, this is mastery, and it begins with simple recognition that sometimes the most powerful sexual practice is not having sex. There's a phenomenon that occurs during conscious sexual union that almost no one in modern culture knows about, though every traditional sacred sexuality system describes it: the creation of what might be called a third body, an energetic entity formed from the merged fields of two partners engaged in high-level sexual practice. This is not metaphor, not imagination, not New Age fantasy. This is something you can feel directly when conditions are right, an almost tangible presence that emerges between and around two people deeply connected sexually, something that has its own qualities, its own intelligence, its own capacity to affect both partners in ways that transcend what either could experience alone. The ancients mapped this phenomenon precisely, gave it names, developed practices for working with it, understood it as gateway to the most profound experiences available through sexual union. Modern people stumble into this occasionally, in moments of exceptional intimacy, but lacking framework to understand what they're experiencing, they dismiss it as particularly good sex, rather than recognizing it as entry into an entirely different order of reality. The scientific basis for understanding this phenomenon exists, but is scattered across different fields, not typically in conversation with each other. Research on interpersonal neurobiology, particularly work of Alan Shore and Daniel Siegel, has documented that during intimate contact, two nervous systems can enter states of resonance or synchronization, literally creating unified regulatory systems spanning both individuals. EEG studies of couples in intimate embrace, including but not limited to sexual contact, show dramatic increases in brainwave coherence, partners' neural activity locking into same frequencies, particularly in alpha and theta ranges. This isn't two brains happening to fire similarly. This is creation of unified field where each brain is influencing and being influenced by the other in real-time feedback loop. Research on cardiac coherence shows similar phenomenon with heart rhythms. When people are touching intimately, their heart rate variability patterns begin to synchronize. Even more remarkable, research using squid magnetometers, sensitive enough to detect extremely weak magnetic fields, has shown that the electromagnetic field generated by the heart, which extends several feet from the body, can be detected in the brain waves of person nearby, suggesting direct electromagnetic communication between bodies. During sexual union, these fields don't just overlap, they merge, creating something larger than either field individually. Traditional teachings describe this third body with remarkable consistency across cultures. In Tantra, it's sometimes called the rainbow body, or body of bliss, understood as subtle energetic structure that two adepts can construct through prolonged conscious sexual practice. The texts describe it as luminous, having specific qualities depending on which chakras are most activated, capable of providing direct knowing that transcends ordinary perception. Taoist dual cultivation speaks of the golden elixir, created when male and female essences merge properly, not literally chemical substance, but energetic reality formed in space between partners. The texts claim this merged field has healing properties, can enhance spiritual development exponentially, can even be directed intentionally for specific purposes. In Kabbalistic sexual magic, the practice of hieros gamos, or sacred marriage, is designed to create unified field through which divine energies can descend. The partners become vessels for something larger than either individual. In Gnostic Christianity, the bridal chamber mysteries involved sexual practices aimed at creating this merged state, as preliminary to receiving gnosis, direct experiential knowledge of divine nature. Even in more exoteric traditions, you find traces. The Christian concept of two becoming one flesh is usually interpreted morally, but in esoteric reading refers to this actual energetic merging. The signs that third body is forming during sexual practice are distinctive and unmistakable once you've experienced them. The space between you and your partner begins to feel charged, almost thick with energy. You might see light with closed eyes, particularly golden or rainbow-colored light. Time perception shifts dramatically, sometimes feeling like hours have passed when only minutes have, sometimes feeling timeless, as if you've stepped outside normal temporal flow. There's a sense of presence in the room beyond just two people. Not frightening, but awesome in original sense of that word. You begin to know your partner's experience without them telling you, feeling what they feel, thinking what they think. Boundaries between self and other become permeable. You're not sure where you end and they begin. The experience takes on numinous quality, feeling sacred or holy, even if you have no religious framework. Afterward, you both report having experienced same things, seeing same visions, receiving same insights, confirming this wasn't individual hallucination, but shared reality. Some couples report feeling the presence of the third body for hours, or even days after sexual union, continuing to influence their consciousness even when not in physical contact. The developmental stages of working with the third body move from accidental glimpses to reliable access. First stage is simply recognizing when it's happening. Most people have experienced hints of this but didn't know what they were experiencing. Start noticing, are there times during sex when something shifts, when it stops being just physical and becomes something more? Second stage is learning conditions that support its emergence. Extended time without rushing, deep emotional connection with partner, synchronized breathing, mutual intention to create sacred space. These factors reliably increase likelihood. Third stage is actively invoking it through specific practices. Eye gazing before and during sex, visualizing your energetic fields merging, using mantra or sound to amplify energy. Fourth stage is learning to sustain the merged state for increasing duration. Initially, it might last only minutes before you lose concentration and drop back to ordinary awareness. With practice, you can maintain it for entire sexual encounter. Fifth stage is directing the merged field intentionally. Advanced practitioners report being able to use this unified consciousness for healing, for receiving guidance, for transmitting blessings, for spiritual work that neither partner could accomplish alone. At this level, sexuality has become genuine spiritual practice, not preliminary to something higher, but direct vehicle for highest realization. And this phenomenon has implications extending far beyond the couple experiencing it. The energetic field created during conscious sexual union doesn't just affect the two people involved, it radiates outward, influencing the environment, affecting others who come into contact with the couple. Partners report that after sessions where a third body was strongly present, their interactions with others are different. People are more open, more trusting, as if some of that sacred energy is still surrounding them. On family level, children raised by parents who understand and work with this phenomenon absorb sense that sexuality connects to something larger than individual pleasure, something numinous and sacred. On collective level, if significant numbers of people learn to access these states, it would create field effects we can barely imagine, pockets of heightened consciousness, locations where the barrier between ordinary and non-ordinary reality is thinner. Some traditional teachings suggest that ancient temples and power spots were created precisely this way, by generations of practitioners engaged in sacred sexual practices that literally charge the location with spiritual energy. Modern people approach sacred sites as tourists, unaware these places were originally laboratories where humans learned to work with consciousness through sexual means. The protocol for working with third body requires both technical skill and devotional attitude. First, partner selection becomes crucial. This level of practice requires deep trust, mutual commitment to spiritual work, compatibility on multiple levels. Not every sexual connection can support this depth of practice. Second, prepare carefully. Create sacred space physically. Clean the room. Set up altar if appropriate. Use candles or incense. Eliminate distractions. Prepare energetically. Meditate together beforehand. Set shared intention. Purify your personal field through breathwork or prayer. Third, establish ritual structure for the practice. This might include specific sequence. Opening invocation. Extended sensual touch without genital contact. Eye gazing. Synchronized breathing. Gradual building of sexual energy while maintaining presence, conscious work with arousal and retention, deliberate invocation of the third body through visualization or prayer. Fourth, during the practice, maintain extraordinary awareness. The moment you lose presence, the third body begins to dissipate. Both partners must stay conscious, breathing, present, meeting in that space between you. Fifth, afterward, integrate the experience through stillness, conversation, perhaps journaling. don't just roll over and go to sleep. The integration period is when insights and gifts from the merged state download into ordinary consciousness. We arrive at the deepest mystery. That sexuality at its highest level is not about two people, but about three, the two partners, plus the emergent entity created through their union. And this third presence is actually portal through which divine energies enter material world. The traditions that understood this saw human sexual union as microcosm of cosmic creative process, the eternal dance of Shiva and Shakti, yang and yin, consciousness and energy. When two humans unite consciously, they replicate on small scale the vast creative process through which universe itself comes into being. The third body they create is literally birth of new consciousness, temporary but real, and in that consciousness, both partners can temporarily transcend their limited individual awareness and taste the infinite. This is why sexuality has been central to every mystery tradition, not because they were obsessed with sex, but because they understood it as most accessible technology for transcendence available to embodied beings. You don't need years of meditation, you don't need psychedelic substances, you don't need guru or special training, though all those can help. You need partner, consciousness, commitment to treating sexuality as sacred, and willingness to surrender into something larger than either of you. The third body waits in potential between every two people who come together sexually. Most never invoke it because they don't know it exists. But it's always there, always available, always ready to emerge when conditions are right, when two humans remember that their bodies are temples and their union is ceremony and their orgasm is prayer, and the space between them is literally gateway to the divine. We arrive at the final teaching, perhaps the most crucial for navigating sexuality in our current world, the necessity of energetic protection, the ability to discern healthy exchange from parasitic attachment, the skill of maintaining your boundaries while remaining open to genuine intimacy. Because here is what most sacred sexuality teachings don't emphasize enough. Not every sexual connection is beneficial. Not every partner is safe. Not every exchange is balanced. In fact, in a world where most people are unconscious of energetic dimension entirely, sexual encounters frequently involve one person unconsciously draining life force from another. Vampirism is common, though rarely recognized as such. This isn't moral judgment, it's energetic fact. A person depleted of their own energy will unconsciously seek to replenish through others, and sexuality is most efficient transfer mechanism available. Without understanding this dynamic and without tools to protect yourself, engaging sexuality, even with good intentions, can leave you energetically compromised in ways that affect every aspect of your life. The scientific framework for understanding energetic exchange during sex comes from multiple sources. Research on emotional contagion has shown that emotional states transfer between people through unconscious mimicry of facial expressions, vocal patterns, and body language, creating physiological synchronization. During sexual contact, this process intensifies exponentially. Studies on cortisol, the stress hormone, show that partners synchronize their stress levels, and someone chronically stressed can literally transmit that state to their partner through intimate contact. Research on microbiomes reveals that sexual partners exchange bacteria, viruses, and microscopic organisms, some beneficial, some harmful. And this exchange extends to energetic level as well. Boundaries at every level, physical, emotional, energetic, become permeable during sex. Psychotherapy research on projective identification describes how one person can unconsciously induce feelings in another that actually belong to the first person, essentially using other person's nervous system to process their own unprocessed material. During sex, these processes are amplified. The partner with less developed boundaries, less energetic sovereignty, inevitably takes on material from the other, and if that material is toxic, depleted, traumatized, the recipient becomes burdened with states that aren't even theirs. Traditional teachings on sexual protection are extensive and sophisticated. In tantric texts, elaborate purification practices precede any sexual activity precisely to clear both partners' fields, so they're not exchanging toxic material along with sexual energy. The importance of guru or lineage transmission was partly about having someone with clear perception check whether a practitioner's field was clean enough for this level of work. Taoist texts warn explicitly against sexual contact with people of certain energetic states: the chronically ill, the emotionally disturbed, those in grief, not from moral judgment, but from energetic hygiene. They understood you can literally absorb illness through sexual contact. The practice of sealing the gates after sexual activity, visualization of closing your energetic field, was considered essential protection. In Kabbalistic magic, extensive banishing rituals before and after sexual work served to protect practitioners from entities, thought forms, and energetic debris that might attach during the vulnerable openness of sexual trance. Even in folk traditions, you find remnants of this knowledge. The belief that you shouldn't have sex during certain moon phases, with certain people, under certain circumstances, all pointing to intuitive understanding that sexuality is energetically consequential and requires discernment and protection. The signs of energetic vampirism through sexuality are clear if you know what to look for. After sexual encounter, you feel depleted rather than energized, drained rather than fulfilled. Your mood crashes. You experience anxiety, depression, or irritability that wasn't there before. You can't stop thinking about the person, not in a normal way of attraction, but an obsessive, addictive way, as if some part of your energy is still attached to them or them to you. You notice your boundaries becoming unclear, taking on the other person's problems, moods, or patterns as if they were your own. You feel a heaviness, particularly in solar plexus or heart area that wasn't there before. Your dreams become disturbed, sometimes featuring the person in ways that feel intrusive. You notice your vital energy, creativity, motivation declining in days following sexual encounter. These symptoms can have other causes, but if they consistently correlate with sexual activity with particular person or type of person, energetic vampirism is a likely factor. The tragedy is that both parties often don't recognize what's happening. The person losing energy feels gradually worse, but might attribute it to stress, age, or other factors. The person unconsciously feeding feels temporarily better after sex, but soon needs another hit, creating addictive dynamic. The stages of developing energetic protection in sexuality progress from unconsciousness to mastery. First stage is simply becoming aware that energetic exchange occurs during sex, that you're not just exchanging bodily fluids, but also emotional states, energetic patterns, even thought forms. This awareness itself is protective because it breaks unconscious identification. Second stage is learning to sense your own energetic state before sexual encounter. Take a moment to check in. How am I feeling? What's my energy level? What's my emotional state? This establishes baseline so you can notice changes afterward. Third stage is learning to sense other person's field before becoming sexually involved. What do you feel in their presence? Do you feel drained or energized? Do they respect boundaries or push past them? Are they present or scattered? This discernment helps you avoid connections that will deplete you. Fourth stage involves establishing energetic boundaries consciously. Visualization practices like imagining protective light around your body, calling in spiritual protection, maintaining sense of your own center even during intimate contact. Fifth stage is capacity to engage sexuality fully while maintaining complete energetic sovereignty, neither bleeding your energy into partner nor allowing their energy to invade you, creating dynamic of true exchange rather than parasitic attachment. And this teaching has implications for all levels of relationship and society. On individual level, developing energetic protection allows you to engage sexuality without losing yourself, maintaining your center while opening to connection. For couples, mutual commitment to energetic hygiene creates sustainable intimacy. Neither partner drains the other, both take responsibility for their own state, and their sexual connection genuinely nourishes both. For families, parents who understand these principles protect their children from absorbing toxic energetic patterns, breaking generational transmission of trauma. On cultural level, widespread understanding of energetic vampirism would address epidemic of exhausting, depleting relationships that characterize modern dating scene. So many people are left confused, hurt, depleted, after sexual encounters, having no framework to understand what happened to them. They might feel used, but the use isn't just emotional or physical, it's energetic and often unconscious on both sides. Teaching people to recognize and protect against this would be genuine sexual education, far more valuable than mechanics taught in standard sex ed. The protocol for protection is both simple and demanding. First, develop strong daily practice that maintains your energetic integrity. Meditation, exercise, time in nature, creative work, whatever fills you rather than depletes you. A person with full energy field is much less vulnerable to vampirism. Second, practice discernment about who you allow into your intimate space. Not everyone deserves access to your sexual energy. Casual sex with strangers is energetically risky precisely because you don't know what you're exchanging. Third, establish clear intention before any sexual encounter. What is your purpose? Why are you doing this? Clear intention creates energetic structure that helps maintain boundaries. Fourth, use protective visualization. Before sex, imagine yourself surrounded by a sphere of light that allows love and pleasure to flow while blocking anything toxic or depleting. Fifth, pay attention during sexual activity. If you start to feel drained, strange, uncomfortable in ways beyond normal vulnerability, pause, breathe, reinforce your boundaries, or even stop if necessary. Sixth, cleanse afterward. This might be physical shower with intention of washing away any energetic debris, salt bath, smudging with sage, visualization of releasing anything that isn't yours. Seventh, check in with yourself afterward. How do you feel? If you notice depletion or disturbance, take action. Additional cleansing, energy work, possibly avoiding future contact with that person if pattern repeats. We arrive at ultimate recognition that your sexual energy is yours, precious, sacred, not to be given away thoughtlessly or taken without true exchange. In culture that treats sexuality as casual recreation, this teaching of protection and discernment sounds restrictive, even prudish, but it's opposite. It's about honoring sexuality so deeply that you refuse to participate in its profanation. It's about understanding that opening sexually is opening at every level, and therefore requires discernment about who you open to. The metaphor of temple is precise. Your body is temple. Your sexual center is holy of holies, and you are the priest or priestess who guards the gate. Not everyone gets access. Not because sexuality is shameful, but because it's sacred. The traditions that developed these teachings weren't sex negative. They were so sex positive that they insisted on protecting sexual energy from corruption, dilution, vampirism. They understood that sexuality consciously practiced with right partner and right conditions is literally path to enlightenment, but that same sexuality practiced unconsciously with wrong partners, in wrong conditions, is path to energetic depletion, emotional confusion, spiritual regression. The difference is protection, discernment, the courage to say no to connections that would deplete you, and the wisdom to say yes only to connections that genuinely serve your highest development. This is not repression, this is sovereignty. And sovereignty is the foundation of all genuine spiritual work, including sacred sexuality. You cannot give yourself fully if you haven't first claimed yourself completely. And you cannot engage sexuality as transformative practice if you're constantly leaking energy through unconscious connections or being drained by vampiric dynamics. The protection practices are not preliminary to real work, they are the real work, creating the container within which all other practices become possible.